doing DeFi, greatest in the world, and they finally about to see why. What you know about XRD? I'm smart money, I ain't never on a decline. What you know about NFTs? It's not just Ace, when you finally gonna realize you need scalability, need more utility, then you better call on these guys. I'm going radical, I'm going Radix, I'm going radical, I'm going Radix. Hyperspeed DeFi, never on a decline, building the future, I feel like a savage.
Hello and welcome. I am Piers, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. This is our podcast, the DeFi Download, a show about decentralized finance and all things crypto, where we dive into the details of the projects, assets and services that are powering the DeFi revolution. Today, I have Oliver Linch, CEO of Bittrex Global. Bittrex Global is a non-US cryptocurrency exchange based out of Liechtenstein and Bermuda that is currently being sued by the SEC. Bittrex was first founded in 2014, with Bittrex Global being founded in 2019, and together they have now weathered 4 bear markets and offer more than 650 tokens. Oliver, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Piers. Real pleasure to be here.
So, as we were saying just before we got started, your background is slightly unusual. As CEO of a cryptocurrency exchange, your background is that of a lawyer.
Yeah, that's right. I spent over a decade as a lawyer, traditional financial regulatory lawyer, practicing in England. I also spent a bit of time out in the States, and quite a bit of time actually out in the Middle East, working on some exciting fintech stuff out of there. So as far as I know, I'm the only CEO of a crypto exchange that is a lawyer by background, which I think says quite a lot about Bittrex Global and our values and the importance we place on doing things the right way, the legal way, the regulated way. But yeah, a not particularly well-trodden path, and hopefully one we'll see more of in future. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about how you became CEO of Bittrex Global, because I think that's an interesting story, right?
Well, interesting to me and hopefully to some others. I think, my journey to crypto was one that I think we're seeing more and more of, which is you take traditional finance. And as I say, I was doing regulatory law, advising banks and broker-dealers, but my specialism was in financial market infrastructure, traditional exchanges, clearinghouses, CSDs, all that kind of stuff. And then in the last, 5 years or so, when I started working out on these mega projects in the Middle East, I started developing an interest in and started advising more and more on the fintech side of things. And so, you take traditional exchanges and fintech and mash them together and you sort of get crypto. And so in 2021, I joined Bittrex Global actually as general counsel. I joined as the lawyer, heading up the legal team there, here. And then 2022, my predecessor as CEO stepped down, and I got the bump up in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I got the bump up to the CEO chair, and now I carry out both roles. So I'm trying to keep my hand in some of the legal stuff. We've got a head of legal who does the day-to-day, but the legal strategy side of things, and the regulation side of things, and where we position ourselves and how we do it, is now so important to a crypto exchange that actually combining those roles at that level is really valuable.
Right. Okay. So let's sort of like try and get inside your shoes a little bit, because you've stepped up as CEO. The SEC, Gary Gensler, is now coming after the exchange. Obviously, your exchange, Bittrex Global, doesn't service US citizens. So like, how are you thinking about building your business at the same time as sort of being under attack, and how are you thinking about the US regulator when you are sort of acting globally?
It's a really good question. And I always used to say one of the great joys of being CEO of Bittrex Global is that because we don't have any US customers, we don't offer our services into the US, I didn't have to worry about the SEC. That was a stock line of mine that I managed to trot out, and it turns out other people had other ideas. And look, we continue to believe that is the case, and that we know we don't have any US customers. We know we don't offer our services into the US at all. There's a discussion to be had, it seems. Now, we wish we could have had that discussion with the SEC before they took action. But unfortunately, we weren't given the opportunity to do that. So the question is, well, how do we go about running our business? We just do. Like the SEC stuff is happening in the background, and we're marshalling our defenses and preparing ourselves to robustly and vigorously defend ourselves in court. But in the meantime, we have lots of loyal users that we want to provide the best possible service for. And we have two regulators. We're regulated in Liechtenstein and in Bermuda, scrutinizing our every move and making sure that we're doing all the things that we're supposed to do under their regulatory regimes. And what's good about their regulatory regimes is they are bespoke, fit for purpose, and designed specifically for crypto. So, and what we've seen across the board actually is the most successful regulatory regimes are, and by successful I mean the ones that ultimately are not just best for the participants, but best at protecting customers. The most successful regimes by that measure are the ones that actually analyze crypto, look at what it is, say, right, here are the risks in crypto, this new sector, this new subcategory, this new thing. How do you identify them? How do you manage them? How do you do this thing safely? And the reason that's more successful is because the other approach is to try and analyze crypto through the prism of traditional finance. And so you get this discussion. It's like, well, is it a bit like a security or a bit like a commodity or a derivative? The answer is sort of no, it's none of those things. It's crypto, it's its own thing, and you're never going to fit this square peg into a round hole, especially when that round hole was created, getting on for 100 years ago. And ultimately, if the job of regulation is to ensure fair markets and to protect customers, then by far the best way to do that is to ensure fair markets and protect customers and actually really get to grips with what the risks are, what the challenges are, and how to do it safely. And that's what we've seen. There are early leaders in Bermuda and Liechtenstein, but we're seeing other jurisdictions now alive to that fact. And we're seeing a whole load of initiatives around the world from countries saying, okay, there's something really interesting here about crypto. There's something really interesting about blockchain technology. We want a piece of that action, but we also want to make sure we're doing it safely, securely, and in a responsible and grown-up manner. And so you see...
So let me ask a question sort of back on the lawsuit. Is like if you are providing services to non-US citizens from a regulated jurisdiction, how come the SEC is suing?
Well, look, Piers, that's a really good question, and you'll appreciate with active litigation going on, we can't get too much into the weeds and the details of exactly what the various claims are here. But what's really important for us is ordinarily the way these things work. And I'm not a US lawyer, but I've spoken, at least in the past couple of months, I've spoken to more than my fair share of them. And ordinarily the way these things work is there's a discussion with the SEC. They will ask questions, they get information, there'll be an exchange of ideas. And after a period of time, once they've gathered enough of their information, if they think that there's a problem, they'll issue what's called a Wells notice. And that is a preliminary determination that there is a problem. Mm-hmm. You would then, after the Wells notice, you have a period of time to respond, and you might do that formally. And then the Wells notice and the response go to the commission, and they vote whether to take an action. None of that happened in our case. The very first contact that we had of any kind at Bittrex Global with the SEC was the delivery of a Wells notice. That was the very first time we heard from them. They have never sought one piece of documentary evidence, one interview, one discussion with anyone at Bittrex Global. They went straight from the Wells notice, and we said, okay, fine. You're not, as I understand it, they're not required to have discussions beforehand. So here's the Wells notice. Can we have a reasonable amount of time to respond to it? Because this is obviously brand new to us. And they basically said, nope, don't bother. We're just going to go ahead and sue you.
Right.
And so, all of those processes and discussions exist not just to give lawyers a job, although, as someone that used to be practicing law, I was always very grateful when there's an expensive process that I can bill my clients for. But what it really exists for is to make sure that mistakes aren't made, that the position is properly understood, and to ensure, fair outcomes. So we haven't had an opportunity to do any of that. We're now thrust into litigation, and we have those explanations, we have those discussions, we, want to make those points. And I think it is unfortunate that we have to make them in front of a judge. But if that's where we have to do it, then that's where we have to do it.
Right. So the fact that you guys, I think that a lot of the industry is going to be watching your case, just because the fact you guys are explicitly not serving US clients, yet still the SEC has come after you, I think is going to send some shockwaves, or has already sent some shockwaves into the industry.
I think it has, because not only do you have the general, it's legislation by enforcement, and that's really bad to mention, which is true of a lot of these actions that the SEC is taking recently. But you've also got hang on, but these guys aren't in the US. So it's just that added, if you're already minded to think that the SEC is engaged in overreaching and kind of on some kind of mission, then I think there are a lot of people that think this is further evidence of that.
And so do you see, how do you think about regulation as a regulatory lawyer? How do you think of regulation from the point of view of its from a jurisprudence point of view? Is regulation over? Is it an overwhelming good, or is it a partial good?
So,
what?
So I go back to law school, day one of week one of law school, and they say, well, what's the point of law, right? And the point of law in a modern society is to facilitate interactions between people. Right? And that's at its fundamental level what it's all about. If I want to go and buy an apple from an apple cart, I need a legal framework to do that, because I need to know that I can go and buy an apple and it will be an apple and not a pear, that it won't be poisoned because there's going to be some kind of rules about food safety standards. And if I don't get my apple, I've got some kind of recourse and I can force someone to give me an apple or give me my money back. Right? At a really basic level, just going up to an apple cart and buying an apple only works if there's a legal framework underpinning it. And those same principles underpin that microtransaction, as we might call it, all the way up to, multi-billion-dollar M&A deals and all the rest of it. Without that framework, without that legal structure, people cannot, with confidence, interact with each other. And so
I actually disagree with part of that, which is that you under normal circumstances, if I go up to an apple cart and buy an apple, there is no requirement for a legal framework. It's if something goes wrong with that transaction, you then start to require the legal framework, because most people if we went back to a state of nature, I could still agree that I give you this fish for that apple, and I don't need a legal framework to ensure that transaction is finished. It's if there's ever a dispute about that transaction, or if there's ever a problem, I get sick, he gets sick, that it feels like law is there to help make sure.
Right. Exactly. And knowing that is there and underpinning it is what gives you the confidence to go into that transaction, knowing what you're getting yourself into. That doesn't mean that everything goes wrong. Of course not, everything goes wrong. Most of the time, when you go and buy an apple from an apple cart, that's a straightforward transaction, and the law has nothing to say about it. But the only way you can do it in a civilized society, and you talk about a state of nature, right? There's a reason that Hobbes said the state of nature is ultimately nasty, brutish, and short, is because without the confidence of, well, what happens if this goes wrong? Am I going to require to get into some kind of fisticuffs to get my apple? Without that level of confidence to say, no, actually, here's what happens if it goes wrong. Here's your legal recourse. Here's how you can remedy the situation. Then yeah, it becomes a question of force or might or, overpowering someone else. The law allows you to interact with people in a civilized manner, knowing that if something goes wrong, and this is why lawyers are also cynical, right? We just sit around basically trying to work out all the various and exciting ways things can go horribly wrong, and prepare for them. But that's what gives you the confidence to do the thing in the first place. And that's true.
I always describe contracts as prenups.
Well,
like you don't expect the marriage to go wrong, but if it does, then you want to describe all the ways in which you fairly allocate in the point in which you're friends, rather than at the point in which you're no longer friends, how the breakup might go.
Exactly, and it's why lawyers, when you're talking about big M&A deals, which are basically a marriage of their own kind, and all the commercial guys are really excited about getting it done and popping champagne corks, and there's lawyers in the background saying, what happens if you turn out to absolutely hate each other? And we get cast as the cynics in the background trying to be the party poopers. And to an extent we are, but actually you're damn grateful for us when something does go wrong, right? And so to bring it back to the regulation, do you need to be regulated to an operating exchange in principle? No, of course not. Like, there could be hundreds of thousands of transactions, millions of transactions that take place without any kind of problem. But that one transaction goes wrong and you lose money, and you realize that actually it's because there wasn't a proper control, there wasn't a proper system. Some money got funded into a terrorist cell, and now all of a sudden you're responsible for atrocities or human trafficking or whatever it is. It only takes one thing to go wrong, and then the call goes up quite rightly. Well, where the hell was the oversight? Where the hell was the supervision? Where the hell was the enforcement? So I think, it's only relevant when stuff goes wrong. But unfortunately, in this complex, multifaceted, rich world that we live in, stuff goes wrong all the time. And if I'm going to have confidence in a financial system or financial product, just as I wouldn't put my money in an unregulated bank, I'm not going to put my money on an unregulated exchange.
Yeah, so let me take a counter position on this, right? Which is that's why DeFi exists. That's what smart contracts are for. That's why we created these public ledgers in the first place, right? We created the ability to be able to program these systems where you could trust minimize, and you don't need to have process and control in the same way that you do in a centralized exchange, where you have lack of transparency in the case of FTX, in the case of Celsius, potentially in the case of Binance. This has just come out this week. So I often look at centralized exchanges as this point in which the technology potential was there, but we were not able to migrate to them because of the complexity of use. Like, it's really difficult to use MetaMask. It's expensive to use Ethereum. Like, all of these kind of things are in the way. And so people go to centralized exchanges because they are the convenient, easy to use front end, and they sacrifice this lack of controls in the back end that is enforced by a public ledger in the first place. So, how do you view decentralized finance, decentralized exchanges? Do you view them as a threat to your business?
I don't, and I think there's a narrative of centralized versus decentralized. I actually think that the entire crypto community is best when they work together, right, and productively take the advantages and disadvantages of each. But I think it is fair to say that decentralized finance in general has some problems that it's not yet addressed, right? Yes, it purports to eliminate the risk of a control going wrong because it's all on smart contracts. But the fact is, for the vast majority of people, and I certainly include myself in this category, actually verifying the protocols underpinning DeFi is close to impossible. Yes, with enough time and effort and knowledge, you could do it, but that's not a real viable option for the vast majority of people. So you say you're trusting the code, and we hear that over again, well, don't trust, verify. But that's not realistic, and we live in the real world. The fact is, you're not trusting the code, you're trusting the people that wrote the code. You're just moving it one step along, and you have no control over those people. And if the lesson you learned from the FTX debacle and all the other scandals of last year is that you want to move to a system that has less oversight, has less supervision, then unfortunately, I think you've learned the wrong lesson.
Interesting. So, like, how's that different from regulation? Because as a regulator, from a regulatory point of view, if I'm putting in process in place, I'm putting in process according to what the local laws of Bermuda is, but I'm a UK resident. I'm dealing with your exchange. I have no idea what those laws are. Your regulator's saying that this is okay according to the process, but how am I not just trusting someone one step removed from me in exactly the same way as I am with a coder?
Well, you are, and that's what's really interesting about the way regulation has grown up around the world, because what you very quickly move towards is a system where the better or the most appropriate regulatory regimes are known, and it becomes a badge that's worth having, right? And what we've seen up until now is those participants that even believed or even purported to believe in regulation, right? And we were very often fighting against the tide. Very often, back in 2014 when the exchange was first created, we were pretty much the only people advocating for regulatory oversight. Right, the founders got literal death threats from people for pushing for regulation, saying, how dare you? Yeah. How dare you? Yeah. This is anathema to everything we stand for. When we
I remember it happening. Right, I remember when Bittrex started to ask for KYC AML information. Yeah,
and harrowing stuff. But when we take over, you'll be first. Right. So we kind of won that argument, and then the naysayers moved on and basically created the system that we call regulatory arbitrage, which is, okay, you find a jurisdiction that isn't really worth very much and say, get a trophy from them, say, oh yes, we're regulated here, and stick that in the trophy cabinet and never look at it again. Actually, what we're seeing now is perhaps too late, but we're seeing a recognition that is not what people want, and people are demanding, most especially at the institutional level. Now, of course, it's more difficult for individuals, but for the institutions, they're now really beginning to say, okay, you say you're regulated, but are you really? How are you regulated? Where are you regulated? What does that look like? And how ultimately does that protect markets and protect me? And so you're seeing, far from this race to the bottom that we were seeing with a regulatory arbitrage perspective, you're actually seeing a flight to quality. And you're seeing institutions around the world say, Bermuda, yeah, we know them. We know that regulatory regime. We know the Digital Assets and Business Act. We know the standards imposed and we approve. And we know the regulator. We know the BMA because they've got this exceptional track record, in their case, in insurance, in the case of Liechtenstein in private wealth and banking. So we know that they're doing a good job in actually supervising and overseeing. So when Bittrex Global say we're regulated by the BMA, that's a badge of honor, not just a trophy to be put in a back cupboard somewhere and ignored, right? So yes, you are trusting someone.
But FTX was regulated in the US, right? Like FTX, it doesn't stop internal. Like you can have these processes, you can have the regulation, but it doesn't stop internal fraud. And this is I think this is why people have drawn that lesson. It's like, yes, from an everyday point of view, everyday person can't go and verify code, but everyday person doesn't understand the laws of Bermuda, doesn't know that that's a good jurisdiction versus, sort of Malta or Gibraltar or somewhere else. Like, doesn't know the difference.
I'm not quite sure that's true. I think when it comes to traditional finance, people do have a good understanding. I think when it comes to traditional finance, you take a certain amount of confidence knowing that your bank is regulated in the UK or that your bank is regulated in Japan. I think people do have an understanding that if your bank is regulated in a jurisdiction that you barely even heard of, you're less likely to have confidence in it.
For sure. I mean, like if it's regulated in your home jurisdiction, I think that for most people, they'll be like, oh, okay, it's regulated in the UK.
I don't think that's right. I think most people would be able to say, I am more likely to trust a bank that's regulated in Japan than one that is regulated in Zimbabwe. I don't think that's an implausible thing for people to say.
Sure. No, that's true. But like, if you ask the average UK person, would they more likely trust a bank in the UK, regulated in the UK, a bank regulated in Japan? I don't know what the answer would be. It would be an interesting survey to go for.
It would
but
be.
I think my point is this. Like, I think the whole industry is going towards this idea of there being verifying entities, right? So like for smart contracts, it's very usual to get an audit. And there are auditors for whom there is a good reputation in the market for being audited, right? And then there are frameworks or smart contract designs that you can go down that make it less likely that it's going to get hacked.
But Piers, we're audited too, right? Centralized exchanges not only have that audit that DeFi has, but also have the regulatory oversight. So we do both.
Well, centralized exchanges don't use smart contracts, so it wouldn't be the same type of audit. But my point is that it's all part of the same thing. Like a decentralized exchange or a centralized exchange, we're both going towards more validation. Like we're not just saying, here's the code, trust it. We're saying, here's the code. I went and spoke with these guys over here. These guys over here have a third-party reputation specifically for auditing, and with regulated exchanges, you're going, we aren't going to a paper-thin jurisdiction. We're going to a well-regulated jurisdiction with proper regulatory oversight. And we are also getting, sort of audited and making sure we have internal proper controls, and we're getting ISO 27001 or whatever it is that you're doing, SOC 2, like those various controls. The thing that's sort of been interesting about this whole narrative is that we sort of, in some ways, I feel like we've gone a little bit full circle, as in like the whole of crypto was created to disintermediate and to make and to lower the cost of financial products. And now we've got to this point where I think actually launching and running an exchange, a crypto exchange, is probably more expensive in terms of legal time, in terms of sort of like making sure that you're and litigation, than running a fully regulated securities exchanges. Like I think that a lot of the exchanges today will have spent more than, for example, Robinhood did in creating the Robinhood Securities Exchange.
Well, I think the answer is we need an all of the above approach, right? Which is why I started off by saying this. I think the industry is at its best when centralized and decentralized products work together and teams work together and create something, more productive than destructive. I think there is always going to be a case for decentralized products and sort of true believers of the decentralized world. I think there is always going to be a place for centralization and people that want to, especially on the retail side, want to get involved in crypto. On the institutional side, want open markets that operate in the same way as traditional markets. Especially they've got decades of trading strategies that they now want to apply to crypto. It's going to be significantly easier for them to win those across on a recognizable market that operates on the same kind of basis they've been used to. I think similarly, if you're looking at, pension funds, it's going to be very difficult for them to, under their rules and under their mandates, get involved in some of the more out there DeFi projects. So if they want exposure to crypto, there's always going to be a need for some kind of recognizable comparator that shows a like for like with what they're used to investing in. So again, I just don't think that there's any need for one side to squeeze out the other. In fact, we're all on the same side. All we're trying to do is demonstrate the power of DLT, the potential for really, everyone uses the phrase, but democratization, but democratizing finance, bringing those advantages to people that don't otherwise have those advantages. Some elements of that will be centralized, some elements will be decentralized, and some will be a mix of the two. And I think that's overall a very good thing.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting next 10 years. I think is sort of the time frame that I think this stuff really sort of thrashes out, and I think that we're definitely going to be in for interesting times in the interim. So what's next for Bittrex Global? Assuming this stuff is behind us, what have you got on the horizon?
Well, it's a really interesting and exciting time for crypto as a whole. Bittrex Global is going to stick true to its principles. We were established on three main principles: regulation, which we talked about, security, and innovation. Security, I think, is is one of those things that is underrated until it goes wrong. And look at the backgrounds of our founders are security engineers. That's what they're good at. In fact, why they created the exchange, they looked around what was out there, realized that it all kind of sucked, and said, well, we can either lose our money on what's already out there or create our own. So security is really at the core of what we do. But innovation is the really interesting one, because innovation in crypto almost becomes a dirty word when it becomes a byword for some of the shiny, headline-grabby, empty promises that we've seen from the industry. I think you talk about a 10-year horizon. We only get there if innovation means actually engaging with our customers on what they want, and showing new ways in which we can make use of DLT, make use of cryptocurrencies. This, 100,000x overnight to the moon kind of, that's not innovation. That's kind of nonsense. So the thing I'm particularly interested in at the moment, and I think has real value, is the tokenization of real world assets. And this to me, from purely kind of geeky, lawyerly perspective, if we can find a real way to tokenize everything from funds, insurance contracts, real estate, I think that there's something really interesting there and really valuable. It's a matter of making sure you do it in a way that works, in a way that provides for that stability, that regulatory certainty that we've been talking about, that allows people to know what it is they're getting into and how it is going to work if and when things go wrong, which is bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier, is where the rubber hits the road on the legal side of things. So that's something I'm personally particularly interested in. But in the meantime, we've got an exchange to run, and we've got lots of loyal users using us to basically fill the gap that has been left by some of the more outlandish, outrageous, and unfortunately unlawful activities that were going on out there. And I think what we're seeing is a clearing out of the industry, and a real kind of stratification into those exchanges, those participants that are doing things the right way, like Bittrex Global, and those that are falling very quickly by the wayside and being called out, not just by enforcement agencies, I should point out, being pointed out and being drowned out by those of us in the industry that are trying to do the right thing. So we're in the middle of a real growing up of the industry, I think, and Bittrex Global is excited to play its part in that.
Oliver, I think we'll leave it there. It's been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I look forward to speaking again in 6 months' time or so and seeing how you guys are getting on.
Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. It's a real pleasure. And it's a date. I'll hold you to it.
Need more utility, then you better call on these guys. I'm going radical, I'm going Radix, I'm going radical, I'm going Radix. Hyperspeed DeFi, never on a decline. Building the future, I feel like a savage.